what we're here to talk about today. The NFL Combine, taking a look at the winners and losers from the NFL Combine. Maybe not losers. Losers is a mean thing to say. But if we're going to be giving out sort of Combine awards here, Heath, which player or players improved their draft stock the most after the NFL Combine?
This one might be wrong because I guess it's possible that he still doesn't get drafted. But for me, it had to be Isaac Guerendo. Like I had no expectations whatsoever, and he turns in maybe the greatest athletic performance at the combine that we've ever seen from a running back. And so he's got some kick return chops. So maybe he gets drafted a little earlier now because somebody wants that athleticism in a kick return role. But he definitely moved onto my radar where he was not before.
I'd be lying if I said I knew that name before the weekend. I didn't even know who he was. I mean, He just came out of nowhere and just lit up the combine. Love seeing stuff like that. What about Xavier Worthy? I mean, he's a guy that I think a lot of people already really liked. He wasn't a name that was flying under the radar, but now we're seeing all of a sudden that he bumped himself into the top 15 consideration. First round pick kind of is looking like his floor potentially. Do you think he improved his stock, or are we just kind of double counting? A really fast guy ran really fast, and yeah, we kind of knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, I think it's more likely that he improved it than he hurt it. I wish he was a little bit bigger, obviously. But I joked this morning on the podcast, is he too fast? Because those poor two guys don't have the best history of NFL success. But no, it's not a negative, probably a small positive. It's just like whether these guys improved their draft stock or not is like, did one team in the first round decide I'm going to draft him top 20 when they weren't before?
Yeah. And I hope I'm not stepping on the rake again, as Alfredo likes to say, but I think Xavier Worthy is a little bit better than some of these other speedsters we've seen in the past, where the John Ross and Jacoby Ford and Darius Hayward-Bay, these guys were kind of one-trick ponies. Xavier Worthy does have a little bit of a route tree. He can do more than just run really fast in a straight line. So I think, if anything, that might open up an opportunity where you can get him for cheap, because people see all of these comps to the other guys that have ran 4.2s and just expect him to be a bust now at this point. But I think Xavier Worthy is a lot better than those guys.
Agreed. Yeah.
So we've talked about the guys that helped their draft stock, all the positivity out of the way early.
Can I sneak one more in? Can I sneak one more winner in? And the only reason I want to mention this, they didn't give us this data last year. The gauntlet drill is one of my favorite drills to watch, where the guys...
Dave, if you pick another player that's on the show sheet, I'm going to hop through the camera here and I'm going to slap you.
Is there a show sheet I'm supposed to be looking at? I thought we were just winging it today.
Just go.
I was going to say Lad McConkey. He was a guy who looked really good in the gauntlet drills, and we didn't get the data last year, but now they're sharing last year's data with us. Do you guys know? I'm going to put you on the spot. I don't know if you saw this in the broadcast. Who ran the fastest speed in last year's gauntlet?
Puka Nacua.
Bingo, Heath.
Yeah.
And this year, it was Lad McConkey. So, yeah, there's something to be said for running in a straight line, not having to do anything. But when you're actually adding football skills into that and you're able to run fast while catching balls, that piques my interest. And Lad McConkey looked pretty good.
More impressive, Lad McConkey doing that drill or me correctly guessing Puka Nacua from last year?
No, both. Both. I love it.
The Puka Nacua felt like a layup. Dave, I want to double check that though, because I also looked this up about the gauntlet timing, and I saw a lot of Keon Coleman that he put up the fastest time by a receiver over the last 2 years through the gauntlet. So we need a producer. We need someone behind the scenes that can double check.
I'm looking right now. Keon Coleman did.
Thanks,
you're
Dave.
Correct. Yeah.
Thanks,
sorry.
Dave. Off the top rope,
we did
the show
inadvertently.
Early.
Yes. Good. Got Keon Coleman out of the way. And the nice thing was, what you don't know is that Lad McConkey was the answer to like one of the very next questions. So we got a 2-for-1 on the show sheet.
Well, you guys are talking. I'll pull up the show sheet here, so we're all on the same page.
Let's just not have show sheets anymore, Dave. Let's just wing it. Let's just see how this goes. So, all right. So did we even answer who hurt their draft stock the most here at the NFL Combine?
We did not.
Again, we don't know for sure what all these teams like value the most, but I certainly don't think Bucky Irving helped his draft stock any at all. So these running backs, and there's been plenty of talk about how there's just like a herd of 8 to 10 of them, and we'll see where they land, and then we'll rank them. Is kind of how I'm approaching it. I feel like Bucky Irving may have gone from the middle of that herd towards the back of the herd.
I'm not going to add anything. I don't want to take us off the rails. I was going to talk about Bucky Irving as well. I think that you are spot on here, Heath.
Dave, do this. Just give me like a look, give me a check, and like I'll let you know if a player's on the list that we've got here.
Got it. 10-4.
All right.
JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, I've got a feeling we're going to chat about him a little bit. All right. So which skill player to you? 'Cause I mean, for fantasy, right? So we're going to talk about the skill players: running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback. Who had the most surprising performance? Good, bad, anything like that? Who was the one that after this weekend or week you were just kind of like, whoa, okay, that guy was surprising?
It was definitely the guy who wasn't the fastest at the gauntlet, Lad McConkey. I was shocked by, and maybe this is like bad form on my part, but he is just simply a lot better athlete than I realized.
Same.
He's right. I like, you knew that in small spaces he had that shiftiness and that a bit the route running, the ability to get open. But the dude's just a really good athlete, and it kind of opened up. I know when I looked at the Football Guys draft guide for the first time, and I saw that when I opened it up, you guys had Lad McConkey in the top 12 picks, and I thought, ooh, I don't know about that. And this performance opened up that possibility to me a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. Let's just promote that real quick. The Football Guys rookie guide. Please, we've got the link down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening here on podcast, that'll be in the details as well. You can check that out. Head on over to the Football Guys website. Our guys at the Dynasty Show put so much effort into that. Over 150 prospects in there, and they're going to be continuously adding in all of the relative athletic scores that we got here after the combine, making updates. So go check that out. Heath, last question before we start breaking it down position by position here. Okay. Favorite rumor to come out of the NFL scouting combine this week? Because there's a lot floating out around right now.
Yeah, I saw, and again, there's probably a lot of rumors I didn't see. I don't know if you guys saw this one or not, but the idea that Kirk Cousins was actually the Falcons' top priority at quarterback. Absolutely loved that. Selfishly, because I have a lot of Drake London and Dynasty, and man, it's getting hard to keep believing, but also for what he could do for Kyle Pitts, what he could do for this offense in general. Like, I think if they go get Kirk Cousins, they're the favorites in the division, and they may have one of the better offenses in the division.
We should have compared notes before we started recording, Heath, because that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. That really surprised me because before the combine, I keep my ear close to the Chicago beat, being a Bears fan, and people were acting like Justin Fields to Atlanta was a done deal. And then all of a sudden it comes out that maybe not. Maybe he's kind of the fallback option. And it's starting to look like Justin Fields, who, if you remember just a couple of weeks ago, Mel Kiper was saying that the Patriots were talking about trading number 3 for Justin Fields. Now it's like maybe a day 2 pick. He's starting to seem like a lot of teams' fallback options rather than the guy that they really want to go out and get.
How much of that do we think is real? How much of that is just kind of posturing right now while everyone's figuring out their draft boards, seeing how much they really like these rookie quarterbacks?
Yes. Also, I think like I get to all those things, but I think one thing about the Fields discussion specifically is I've seen a lot of talk the last week about, the books now have him at minus 240 to go to the Falcons. And I just remember, was it Will Levis last year that eventually got to minus 200 to be the number two overall pick? Like, the books reacting to money that's coming in for the most part, I think. And so I would not take too much of that. Now, the reporting, I think a lot of times you can kind of read the wording of a report and get a pretty good idea of who the source is, or at least who the organization of the source is. But we got to be careful putting too much stock into it at this time of year.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing started because Justin Fields' agent posted a video that was like 6 seconds long on social media of him jumping up and down, and everyone said, "Oh, he's excited. He must be going home to Atlanta." And then people started pouring money into the sports books, which moved the line. And then they said, "Oh, well, we're talking about double counting season here. Isn't that double counting? Like, everybody just bet on Justin Fields going to Atlanta." And then they said, "Well, now the Vegas books are saying it." I went back and looked historically 2 years ago. Russell Wilson, up until 2 hours before he was traded to Denver, was plus 500 to go to Denver. 3 days before he went to Denver, he was plus 1,200. So we don't know anything. We're all speculating here. People keep these moves close to the chest. If we think a deal is done, it's not done until it's officially announced.
We don't know anything. You have never been more right on this show, Dave. Good call. Good call. All right, so let's talk about the quarterbacks here. That's a good segue into the rookie quarterbacks that we have here that were at the NFL Combine. And famously, Caleb Williams did not throw, did not do any type of medical checkups. Are we making too much of this? Is this kind of like a, listen, guys, he's going to go number 1 overall. Let's not blow this out of proportion.
That's the way I'm taking it. I think that like you can look at these guys who choose to not do certain things, and it's you can push it one way or the other. One, they think releasing this information or doing this test is going to hurt them, or two, they think that their future is pretty secure and all they could do is damage themselves by somehow falling down during the 40-yard draft or something, 40-yard dash or something. 40-yard draft would be fun. I put that together.
That'd be really fast.
But anyway, I with Williams, it seems pretty clear to me that this is more the latter and not the former. I don't think he's worried about hurting his draft stock. I think he just knows where he's going.
How can he possibly improve his draft stock? He is the absolute consensus guaranteed number 1 overall pick. I don't think anybody is leapfrogging Caleb Williams here. So yeah, I think like if you're a guy who has something to prove and you start sitting out drills, maybe that's a little bit concerning, but Caleb Williams, he doesn't have anything to prove. Just go watch the tape. Look at the numbers. He did everything he needs to do over the last few years at USC.
Now, one of the quarterbacks that had allegedly something to prove, and I still think he still has more to prove, is JJ McCarthy, the quarterback from Michigan, who, I mean, he showed up at the combine weighing a lot more than he did when he was playing at Michigan this last season. He had some mixed performances, mixed reviews. A lot of the rumors are now that he's not only going to go top 15, but maybe even top 10, maybe even top 5, just because of the way teams are viewing quarterbacks, which, I mean, that might be a little over our skis here, but Heath, what are your thoughts on JJ McCarthy and being a dynasty guy? How high are you willing to draft him in a super flex draft?
First off, I just wish that I could show up somewhere weighing a lot more than I used to and people would praise me for it. Like if that happens with me, I'm getting criticized. But no, I think with these quarterbacks, landing spot matters a little bit. Like it doesn't matter as much as it does when we were talking about running backs. But in terms of McCarthy, he's a second half of the first round guy in a super flex draft for me. But he could get as high as 7 if these reports that he's actually QB3 are real. And he could fall all the way to 10, 11, 12 if he's going at the end of the first round. It doesn't sound like it's very likely he'll fall all the way out of the first round. But yeah, it's really how much is an NFL team willing to commit? How much is somebody going to pay to trade up to draft McCarthy? Because we do, and again, we get into trouble even with that because we did the same thing with Trey Lance and said, well, he's got 3 years to become a starting quarterback. It turns out he had 0. But I put a little more weight and push him up into that pick 7, 8 range. If he's a top 10 pick, I'd feel more comfortable with him at like 10, 11.
I just want to say, this is going to be a smoldering hot take. Get ready for it. I don't think his combine performance was good or bad. I mean, everybody seems like to be super, he lit it up at the combine or he looked terrible at the combine. I think there were some good things and there were some bad things. I don't think the combine really moved the needle all that much for JJ McCarthy. I'm very confused by what I'm seeing on social media these last couple of days, where you've got the people that love JJ McCarthy saying that he did everything he needed to improve his draft stock. And then you've got the people that don't like JJ McCarthy saying, well, he missed these easy throws. I think his performance was very much so a Rorschach test. You see what you want to see. If you like JJ McCarthy, he looked great this weekend. If you didn't like JJ McCarthy, he looked terrible this weekend. When in reality, I think the quarterbacks as a whole were a little bit underwhelming, and JJ McCarthy might have been the best of the bunch, but it really wasn't a great showing from the quarterbacks this weekend.
Is he one of those guys that could actually get Will Levis here, where we think he's going top 5, top 10, and he ends up in the second round?
I think it's going to be either him or Jaden Daniels. I think one of those guys is we're expecting both of these guys to go top 5, top 10, and it wouldn't surprise me if one of them ends up just falling down boards.
It seems, listen, these guys aren't fantasy managers, and so they're real NFL general managers and owners, and most of them are probably smarter than us. But it just seems really hard for me to believe that somebody's going to see Jaden Daniels' potential, and 30 teams are going to pass on that in round 1.
Right.
It seems more likely to me that McCarthy's the one that falls, but Daniels definitely could fall.
And we saw it with Will Levis last year, and just 2 years before that, or the year before that, I'm sorry, Malik Willis was a guy that we all thought was going top 5, top 8, top 10, and fell to round 3.
Oh, please, Titans. You have the chance to do the funniest thing ever here. Draft JJ McCarthy. All right, let's take a look here at the wide receivers at the combine. They are sort of the belle of the ball here with this
Mhm.
class. We already talked about Xavier Worthy, who's now the owner of the fastest 40 time ever, 4.21. The data guys love him because he's got an excellent age adjusted production profile. Heath, I know you are big into data and spreadsheets,
Yep.
but you're
Yep.
also smart enough and you watch film and you know what you're talking about here. Is this a player, Xavier Worthy? Is he now a lock to go in the first round because of this? How should dynasty managers be viewing him?
Yeah, I don't know that he's necessarily locked to go in the first round because of this, but it definitely makes him more likely to go in round one. And I think as a dynasty manager, like this, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but this whole weekend made evaluating the second or third, depending on how you're going to tier the first three guys, that second or third tier of wide receivers much more difficult. Because basically Xavier Worthy and everyone around him had a great weekend. So it's going to come down to what do teams prioritize. It didn't used to be that 165-pound wide receiver had that much of a shot, right, of being drafted that high. But I think we've seen enough lately to where that's probably not going to hold some teams back. It is definitely a fit thing, but I'm going to view him as someone who's going to be drafted in the JJ McCarthy range, somewhere from pick 7 to 12, depending on how the draft goes. And then probably as a borderline top 25 dynasty wide receiver once he gets into the league.
So it's interesting because you bring up that so many wide receivers
Right.
had the good weekend. I kind of want to move around here. There's a question that I wanted to ask of since there's just so many good receivers in this class, so many athletic guys. It was almost like everyone ran fast, so nobody ran fast kind of thing. Do you think that because of the supply and demand, there's so many of these good athletic wide receivers, do you think a lot of them actually start to fall? Maybe like in the NFL draft, could be in favor of some offensive linemen or some other less, not as deep classes here in this NFL draft class, or maybe even in dynasty draft, someone's like, I really want the RB1 because I can wait and get a wide receiver later in round 2. Do you think that ends up happening, Heath?
I don't. I mean, I do think that when I look at people's rankings right now in terms of like a super flex rookie draft, they it's hard because there's not a running back that you want to put in the top 12. But once we get landing spots, there's probably going to be 2 who are drafted in the top 12. So by that measure, yes, the wide receivers maybe fall a little bit in rookie drafts because we're not projecting the running backs in round 1, and they're definitely going to be there. But the problem with the NFL draft is that there's not a whole lot, I don't think, in this free agent class, especially with Mike Evans just signing. And most of these guys, like, you're going to have to wait 20 picks, even if you trade up a little bit, before you get another shot at them. So I would expect a very early run with Harrison, Neighbors, Adunze going in the top 12 to 15. And then maybe you get a little gap of offensive linemen. But at some point, I think we had this 2 years ago where we just had like 5 straight picks at the end of round 1. Wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. And people see that run start to happen. And now you got teams coming from round 2 to go get them, make sure they don't miss the run.
It was last year. It was JSN, Addison, Flowers, and Quentin Johnston went back to back to back to back. And I think, I think you hit the nail on the head. We're going to see the same thing this year where it really wouldn't surprise me if 6 or 7 go in the first round, especially with the way the salary cap moved now. And we're going to see these guys get huge paydays on the free agency market with how valuable a good wide receiver can be to an offense. These guys on rookie contracts are going to be almost as valuable as a quarterback on a rookie contract. So I think that they're going to go out and try to get wide receivers in the draft this year. I think it's going to be 6 or 7 guys going in round 1.
And I think the thing that not only is going to be talked about a lot in the fantasy space and in the NFL space, it's just kind of how the wide receiver position has changed. We have so many more of these smaller guys that you want to get in space, the faster wide receivers. There's going to be so many more types of receivers that teams are willing to draft early and fantasy managers are willing to take chances on. It's not your prototypical big X receivers that you used to only invest in the past. So, Heath, you mentioned those top 3 guys. You mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. After this combine, or maybe we're not there yet, but has there been a guy that kind of made himself the clear-cut wide receiver 4 in this class?
If anything, I think the opposite happened for me this weekend because Troy Franklin was my wide receiver 4, and he didn't have a bad weekend, but I did feel like that Worthy and Brian Thomas and even Adonai Mitchell probably got a little closer to Troy Franklin than they were in my mind. Now, it won't be enough to where any of those guys are going to – I think Franklin will probably remain my wide receiver 4 at least until we get to the draft and get landing spots. But, man, those guys – I'm having a harder time differentiating between than I was before the combine.
I'm a big fan of Brian Thomas Jr. And Alfredo, you just talked about how we see these like smaller guys really doing things in the NFL that we haven't seen in years past. But I'm still a sucker for that prototypical guy, the 6'4" guy that's a fluid runner, can get downfield. He doesn't play quite as big as his size, but I'm hoping that's something where he can beef up a little bit and learn to play through contact. But I really like Brian Thompson. I've got him as my wide receiver 4 right now.
Yeah, Brian Thomas too. He's also good.
Brian Thomas, yes.
See, I nailed it. I nailed the joke
today.
this week when someone didn't say something right. Last week, not so much. So you talk about the bigger, more fluid guys. Keon Coleman. This was a guy we kind of briefly touched on earlier in the show. He had the slowest 40 time of all the receivers in his group, runs the 4.6, which to the layman, you're just like, that's not good. But then he goes out and has what's recorded as the fastest speed in the gauntlet drill by any receiver over the last two. Yeah, it turns out. So thanks, Dave. So Heath, when you see something like that and you say, okay, it's kind of like game speed versus this timed track speed, so to speak, do you think we just tend to overvalue the 40-yard dash and some of this testing stuff and it just gets a little overblown?
Well, first off, I think it's a perfect opportunity for what Dave was saying earlier about JJ McCarthy. Now, anybody who liked Keon Coleman can point to the gauntlet and say, see, he's awesome. And anybody who didn't like him can point to the 40 and say, see, he's slow, LOL. But I don't know. Maybe for the people who are more casually consuming this content, the 40 gets overweighted. But I see a lot more on my Twitter feed talking about how the 40 is not real football and you shouldn't care as much about the 40 than I see people touting 40s, except for maybe like record-breaking runs. So it seems like at least within the industry, we've got a pretty good grip on understanding. And as long as that carries over into the analysis, then the people who are consuming that analysis should probably be weighting it about the right ways as well. It's just that, like, if you just turn on the combine and you're not really scouting prospects and you just like, this is the thing you're not going to watch people do bench press probably, but you'll watch them run the race.
Dave, was that you who was saying, I really want the NFL combine to add the squat as an event?
No, but that would be pretty cool. I would like that.
You would sit there and watch that for just 8 hours with your dog.
But
so
could we have like some like let's add like a wrestling event? Like it's just a little bit of hand-to-hand combat,
like Roman Greco wrestling. Just that's it.
Yes.
Oh my gosh! Just
and
give
then
him a pit.
maybe have him run a mile and race that or a 400.
Since we're just going totally off on a tangent here, my favorite drill is the offensive tackle one where they have to lay flat on their back, like simulating like they just got pancaked, and then they have to get up. Like, that's my favorite drill to watch personally.
More of that type of stuff, please.
Yeah.
I want to see some functional strength.
My wife happened to walk in as I was watching the defensive linemen do the hoop drill where they're going around dropping the towels, picking them up. And she's like, this is what you've been doing today? This seems like so much fun. Just watching fat guys run in a circle. That's great. She was so excited. And she's like, wait, is that a towel? Why are they picking up a towel? Why does that matter for football? So we need more of those fun drills. So we talked about, let's get back on track here. We talked about some of the biggest names in the combine and in the NFL draft itself, but maybe who are some of these underrated receiver prospects that many people aren't talking about, but you really like from this class?
Yeah. And I hopefully you can tell me or talk about this guy for a second, because I haven't heard anything about his absence, but Malachi Corley, the dude just destroyed Conference USA. And I watched too much Conference USA football this past year, and it was Conference USA. So we should take that into context, but he is like, he's a real football player with the ball in his hands. And I am hopeful that he doesn't get discounted too much from not seeing him this weekend. And then I'd say the other one's Roman Wilson. I see him in round 3 of a lot of rookie mocks, and I think depending on the right landing spot, he could end up being worth a round 2 pick.
I'm glad you mentioned him because I was going to ask you about him. We had Cecil on a few weeks ago talking about what he saw at the Senior Bowl, and he had a lot of good things to say about Roman Wilson. He was kind of one of the standouts from the Senior Bowl, and then also, hit every box that you want to see at the Combine as well. So yeah, I'm a big fan of him as well.
Yeah, just to go back really quick, Heath, you mentioned Malachi Corley. He's one of these guys that he's already being touted as the next Debo Samuel because we have one of those every single season. I think though, from an actual physical standpoint, he is like somewhat close. He's like 5'11, 215. He's built like a running back. He's this guy that breaks tackles. The tough part for evaluators is that he is used in a strictly short area role where he, I believe, caught more screen passes than any other wide receiver in the NCAA last season. And he's dubbed the Yak God or Yak King, whichever it is. I was actually really surprised he didn't go to the combine because this is a guy that you'd like we kind of alluded to earlier. If you have questions about speed and other things, you want to go and alleviate those questions. So I'm curious as to why he didn't do it.
I will say though, like the things that you make him so difficult to evaluate also just scream Debo Samuel.
Yeah. Yeah. It really does.
Even his weaknesses look like Debo Samuel.
Yeah. All right, so we've talked about the wide receivers here. The wide receivers, like we said, it's the bell of the ball here for this draft class, but the running back position, it seems to be a lot harder to evaluate. And I think the kind of easy cop-out answer for all of us is always, let's just wait and see where they end up in the draft, right? And that makes the most sense here. I do want to talk about some of these players specifically, though. So Trey Benson, Marshawn Lloyd, Jaylen Wright. These are all three names of guys that just absolutely crushed the scouting combine, whether it was weighing in really well, having a great 40, some great explosive numbers and agility drills, and they all kind of similar production profiles, 3-down skill sets. Of those three prospects, is there a guy between them that sort of stands out for you that you really like at the position?
Well, I think that once we get landing spot now, like that, I did that because it is still true, but yeah. I leaned towards Trey Benson,
okay.
And I leaned towards him coming into the combine. I think of this group, he definitely put up the best size speed score, which I value quite a bit for running backs specifically, and I'm more hopeful that he could actually be like a full-time running back and handle the load than some of these other guys. So yeah, I'll lean towards Benson. He's a guy who, if you told me I had to draft a running back in the first round and I don't get to know the landing spots, I'd take Benson 12th.
Now, what I will say, and I know we're talking about rookies and combine here, but Heath, I think what you're kind of alluding to, I'm going to fast forward a couple of weeks to free agency. This free agency class is loaded to the gills with talent. So we have to see where those guys land. Then we have to see what spots are available. Like somebody asked me the other day, what's the best landing spot for a rookie running back? And I said, I can't even answer that question until I see who lands where. Let me just read this off real quickly. Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, Zach Moss, Devin Singletary, CEH, AJ Dillon, J.K. Dobbins, and then Bill Barnwell. I don't know if you saw, he just came out with an article talking about the potential cap cuts. And it's going to be Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara. It's a lot of talented running backs that are going to be available in just a couple of weeks.
And I think that's actually going to create some opportunity for speculation and maybe even profit in that it's a lot of production. It's also a lot of touches. Like there's a lot, like Derrick Henry and Austin Eckler, and those guys at this stage of their career might not actually be that much better than some of these rookies that we've been poo-pooing for the last 6 months because they aren't perfect prospects. Pete Prisco at CBS loves to say, just give it to the young guy, or give it to the guy with young legs. And so I do think like that, and that was the other thing that came out of the running back testing this weekend. These guys may not be perfect prospects and there may be holes in all their games, but there are still some exceptional athletes coming into the NFL as running backs.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll take the top 4 or 5 rookie running backs this year, the guys that we've already been talking about a little bit, over almost any of those guys that I named, besides maybe like Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs. But like you said, Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler, I'm looking at Trey Benson and some of these other guys before I'm even thinking about looking the other way in Dynasty.
Well, one of these rookie running backs we haven't talked about yet, who I mean, Heath, at one point, or maybe still, you have him as your rookie RB1. I know I have Jonathon Brooks out of Texas. He was not able to participate in the combine. He's healing from his knee surgery. He says he should be done with rehab by July 1st. That was his words here at the combine, and he'll be participating in training camp like normal. I still think there's a lot of trepidation
Right.
from people in the fantasy community of saying, this might kind of slow him down his rookie year. He might be a little bit behind. How much does this injury worry you for production in year one? Because if you don't really get that production in year one, it gets a little bit harder to kind of count on that production going into year two.
I think the most difficult part of it is the position, because if I don't really want to draft running backs if I'm not a true contender.
Mhm.
And if I'm a true contender, I don't really want to draft somebody who's hurt. And so that's where, like, I think if I was just ranking these guys based on talent and who I think could be the best NFL running back, Jonathon Brooks is my RB1. But I don't know. I mean, we've got two examples from the last year of young guys coming off ACLs, and Javonte Williams didn't ever really seem to become Javonte Williams again in that year one, which is what we kind of come to expect. And Breece Hall took like 4 weeks of the season and all of a sudden was just a killer again. So there's hope for him, and I'm going to feel pretty good about Brooks if he goes in round 2 or 3 of the NFL draft, and I can get him in the middle of round 2 of my rookie draft. I like that. But if I'm at the end of round 1 as a contender and I'm thinking, you know what, the only hole I have is running back. I like Brooks a little bit more, but this guy's on the Chargers. I'm probably going to take the guy that's playing this year at full speed.
And comparing to a rookie running back, I think a lot of people faded Tajay Spears last year in their rookie
Mhm.
drafts, thinking, well, just buy low on him mid-season. And there was no opportunity to buy low because he came out guns
Right.
blazing week 1, looked great, and he has completely vaulted himself in value. So again, every injury is different, and saying this thing happened to this player in his recovery, so it's going to happen to another player. It's not a perfect science, but I think we're kind of at this point where you can just continue to bet on modern medicine. We're seeing players bounce back quicker than ever. We're seeing them recover and get back to full strength. So I don't know if there's going to be an opportunity to buy low on Jonathon Brooks mid-season. I think if you want him, you're going to have to pay up in the rookie draft, because chances are, based on what we've seen over the last few years from guys coming back from these injuries, there isn't going to be that super down year one like we've seen in years past.
Dave, you mentioned betting on modern medicine, and the reports have started to kind of swirl around. Jonathon Brooks, the doctor who did his knee surgery, is the team doctor for the Dallas Cowboys. And so they are very, very familiar with his
Yeah.
medical records. Tony Pollard now into free agency. This
Mhm.
could be one of those things where the Cowboys might know everything they need to know about Jonathon Brooks.
And that one's interesting because, like, we've heard Tony Pollard say repeatedly over the last couple of months that the reason he wasn't as productive last year is the first 12 weeks of the season he wasn't recovered from last year's injury. So do the Cowboys want to go draft a guy who's currently hurt? And maybe, like, that's the one place where I think Dave's probably right. Like, there's probably not going to be a buy low. I'm also not sure he's going to help you win this year.
Right.
The one place we could get is if somebody like the Cowboys says, you know what, we're going to spend a round 3 pick on Brooks. We believe he's going to be awesome. And we're going to give Derrick Henry a 1-year contract. And we'll try to make that transition mid-season. And then maybe you do get a little bit of a buy low on Brooks, but I don't know.
I think that's sort of the biggest delineation between real football and fantasy, where real NFL teams will look at a guy and be like, listen, we'll take a year to kind of bring him in slowly and get him into our system. Whereas fantasy, we're just super impatient and we can't stand for that. Now, we've been talking here about these landing spots, where these guys might go, and obviously how that's going to change their value. Heath, you put out, I thought, a really awesome poll on Twitter last week about if Blake Corum, just to throw a name out there, right, is the first running back drafted. He lands with the Chargers. Where would you take him in Superflex rookie drafts? And the majority of people said between picks 9 and 12. So it presumably makes him the RB1. With the landing spots being so influential and kind of changing things here in terms of how we're going to value these players, what are some of your favorite landing spots for running backs in the NFL draft?
Yeah, and it wasn't like Blake Corum wasn't even just completely a random guy. I chose him because I think the
Harbaugh.
best landing spot is the Chargers.
Yeah.
I think the combination of Harbaugh and Roman may not be fantastic for Justin Herbert or whoever's playing wide receiver, but could be pretty awesome for a running back, especially if it just happens to be the running back that Harbaugh coached in college. And so that would be my number one landing spot. I think what Dave said is right. We don't actually know the best landing spot until we see where Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs at least go. But Chargers first, and then I would say Texans would be second. And then I feel pretty confident that the Raiders are going to do their very best to play low-scoring defensive football games, which will mean lots of running back rush attempts. So I'd put the Raiders third. Chargers, Texans, Raiders.
And Justin Herbert, for all he does with his, just cannon where he can throw the ball downfield, he loves to check down. So that's why I really want to see one of these running backs land in Los Angeles, because there's going to be a ton of pass catching upside there as well. Yeah, I think Blake Orem, I think your lead in the poll was picks 9 to 12. If he lands with Los Angeles and they don't bring Austin Eckler back,
Oof.
it might be crazy, but I'm probably looking at Blake Corum as probably the 6th or 7th guy off the board.
Yep. Yeah, and that's why the most common vote was for 9 to 12. The most common reply was Blake Corum in round 1, LOL. Because there are a lot of people who don't think Corum's very special, and he was a lot better earlier in his career in Michigan than he was after some of the injuries. But so I get that, but I think you're right. If he goes to the Chargers without significant competition, there's no way he's getting to pick 9.
Kind of like a random last little landing spot that I was thinking of as we're talking here. The Ravens. Do we think the Ravens actually invest in a running back? There's always the speculation every single year, and they kind of just end up throwing 3 guys out there. They saw the formula this year. They could do it with Keaton Mitchell and Justice Hill and Gus Edwards. That they don't really need to invest.
Who's a 34-year-old free agent right now? They've done it
Derrick
with
Henry.
Latavius Murray, and they've done it with like
Right.
Melvin Gordon. They bring in all of these old guys. Devonta Freeman a few years ago. It's the guy that we least expect that's like on his final legs that they're going to end up bringing in, right?
I would like to see Derrick Henry there because I think his style and Lamar's style would be just a beautiful thing to watch. And, I don't know that I love it for a lot of the running backs, but I might like it for Braylon Allen too. I think he might be able to have success in that system with Lamar.
Well, that brings me to my next question. Maybe that's your answer here, but Heath, we talked about some of the higher level guys in this running back class, but do you have a favorite sleeper running back for this rookie class?
Yeah, I guess that's probably it. And I probably lean a little bit more towards production when we get out of the surefire. Everybody knows these guys are going to be good. I'm certainly more interested in a guy that's had 250 carries in a season than the guy that never has 100. Because I know a lot of people worry about the tread that's been taken off the tires in college. I worry more about if he couldn't ever be a workhorse in college, why would you think he's going to be one in the NFL? But for the most part, I also think when we're talking about a running back class that's not super strong at the top, I'm going to have a really hard time getting excited about the guys that are definitely behind those guys.
Yep.
You're not even able to be a part of the top tier in a class that we don't think is particularly good.
Now, can I press you for a second and just see what your thoughts are on Jaylen Wright? Because you look at consensus rankings right now on Keep Trade Cut, he's the RB10, and he looked good at the combine. And again, we mentioned the rookie guide earlier. Pre-combine, our guys, Jeff, Christian, and Kevin, they had Jaylen Wright as their RB1 in this class, and he's starting to move up draft boards now. Is he a guy that you're getting excited about? Because he was more of a change of pace guy in college.
Yeah, So I think that they're having him at 1 was way more right than the consensus having him at 10.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have given him as a sleeper answer because I knew that you guys had him at 1. But no, I think he is the kind of back who could be super exciting he's relatively cheap and turns into an RB2 for you.
Right.
I have a hard time envisioning him becoming an RB1. And so if the consensus gets closer to that top 3 or 4 running back in the class ranking, I'm going to have a hard time seeing a lot of potential for profit.
I think I'm this in the same boat as you, Heath. I've got those 3 guys I mentioned earlier, Benson, Lloyd, and Wright, all kind of in that same tier. If there's the guys that could potentially become the bell cow, even though I know the NFL is not doing that anymore, right? Like we're seeing less and less bell cows.
but it's still, I want to have that
It's still
out.
relevant. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Like if you're going to shoot, you might as well shoot for the guy that can give you the biggest return back. And I think it's probably those guys, the bigger guys with the speed, Marshawn Lloyd, Trey Benson, those guys.
Yeah.
Also, Jonathon Brooks weighed in the exact same as Trey Benson. I was kind of surprised with that. So I'll be interested to see if we ever get a speed time on him.
Yeah, I think if we could just settle on a compromise of Wright at RB5, I'd feel, or 6, depending on, I'd feel okay with that.
It'll definitely be interesting to see where all these running backs end up going. The NFL, they're just looking for playmakers. We kind of saw it last year. Achane, Gibbs, Keaton Mitchell. They're the running back position is changing just as much as the wide receiver position is. Now, another position that we saw kind of a renaissance last year in the NFL was tight end. We saw so many young tight ends, rookies, be productive after years and years of everyone just saying, stop drafting rookie tight ends. It's not going to work out. And as an industry, we just kind of kept stepping on that rake and letting it happen. And, just Elmer Fudding our way into a rookie tight end every single year. And then all of a sudden we get Sam Laporta and all these great players. Brock Bowers in this class is seen as the generational tight end. He did not test per se. He did do some measurements, interviews, stuff like that. He measured it nearly the exact same as Sam Laporta. So I not that it has any direct correlation, but it does make me ask, we all love Brock Bowers. Do you think that he can have that same type of productive first year that we saw from Laporta and some of these other guys where he is, a top 6, top 7 fantasy tight end in his first season?
I think it's an extreme long shot. I think you need the perfect situation of a very good offense that also has room for a large tight end role, and you happen to score double-digit touchdowns in your first year in the NFL. I am more pessimistic about rookie tight ends than most. I don't really like drafting tight ends in the first round. And I know Sam Laporta is not even the argument against that because he wasn't being drafted in the first round of rookie drafts. That was Dalton Kincaid. So I think I'm going to feel a little bit better about maybe taking a tight end in round 2 or round 3. Bowers is going to be in my top 12, of course. But I think with most tight ends, and we talked about this with some of the running backs earlier, with most of them, you can get them at a discount 15 months later.
Bowers is currently the tight end 2 on Keep Trade Cut. He has jumped ahead of Trey McBride, TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts. I understand we're excited, but what worries me is when you start actually looking at the draft board and where he's going to end up. Like Heath said, it needs to be a good offense with a role for a tight end and somewhere where you can score a lot of touchdowns. I just don't see that happening with how top loaded this wide receiver class is. I don't think Bowers goes in the top 8 to 10 spots because if teams are between Marvin Harrison or Roma Dunze or Malik Neighbors and Brock Bowers, they're almost assuredly going with the wide receiver. And then once you look outside of that top 10, there just aren't a ton of really good landing spots. Like maybe the Jets would make sense at 10. I don't think Denver's going to do it. I don't think Las Vegas is going to do it after putting a first round pick on Michael Mayer last year. New Orleans, I don't think they're going to. The logical spot, and Jeff Bell had it going here in his mock draft, is to Indianapolis. But there he's the number 2 behind Pittman with Anthony Richardson. I don't know if I can get too excited about that landing spot. Maybe Cincinnati, that's like everybody's pipe dream. But even there, he's the number 3 option behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. So I think he's a very talented guy. I'm going to be buying him in Dynasty, but it's going to be really tough for me to get excited about his 2024 outlook.
I think that you've made an excellent case that the rest of the NFL should just let him fall to 32 and he can be the heir apparent to Travis Kelce.
I mean, that would be wonderful. And honestly, if he does fall into the 20s, it wouldn't shock me one bit if KC tries moving up to grab him.
They could definitely manage that. Get them both on the field. Oh, that'd be sick. That'd be disgusting. I'd be really upset. So, I mean, tight ends, I think that one thing that's important to remind these dynasty managers is we have to be patient with tight ends. Like, even though we saw some success last year with first year players, even Trey McBride, who ended up being really good towards the end of last season, it took an injury to Zach Ertz. It took his second year in the league. Dalton Kincaid, who was the top guy last year, it wasn't, all sunshine and roses in his first year. Kyle Pitts has had his ups and downs. Tight end is just one of those things. The circumstances have to land right. But I would say
Trey McBride's breakout came the week before. Ertz got injured. That accelerated it, but McBride was carving out a role before the injury. Just got to sneak that in there, Alfredo. I'm sorry.
Okay, Dave. Okay, thanks. Thanks, dear. So I would say that, I mean, like the landing spot, obviously it matters, but one of the big correlations we've seen between tight end prospects that end up being good and productive in the league is their athleticism. And this class actually seemed to be pretty athletic overall. It wasn't just the running backs and receivers, but the tight ends as well. Is there a guy not named Brock Bowers, Heath, that stands out to you after this combine that you're like, I'll take a shot on him as one of my last picks in a rookie draft?
Yeah, and I'm going to give Dan Schneider some credit because I think he had him as tight end 2 before the combine. But Theo Johnson out of Penn State, just a monster of a man, 6'6", 260, I think, and super athletic. That's the type of guy, especially if he's going to be available in round 3 of rookie drafts. Absolutely, I'll throw the dart there. Give me the outlier athlete who's also enormous.
Yeah, his relative athletic score came in number 1 out of 1,105 tight ends dating back to 1987. The most athletic relative guy that we have seen in 30 something years.
Well, yeah, I'm looking at it right now. 4.58 in the 40 at 200 and let's call him 260 pounds,
Yeah.
6'6". It's just ridiculous. Humans shouldn't be allowed to move like that.
No, and I think it's a very important to remember. You still have to be able to play football,
right?
But that specimen is going to be available late in round 2 or early in round 3, and I would just much rather make that bet than betting pick number 6 or 7 on Brock Bowers.
Yeah. And I did it last year with Zach Kuntz and did it last year with Darnell Washington, but they were so cheap in rookie drafts.
Nailed them.
I don't care. I don't care. I will continue throwing my 3rd round darts at these freak athlete tight ends.
You had the right idea, Dave. You had the right idea. Well, gentlemen, this has been awesome. Heath, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to give you a moment here. Just please plug everything that you're doing over at CBS, Fantasy Football Today, the Dynasty Show. You've got so much going on.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. I love talking to both you guys, and I love talking about Dynasty Fantasy Football. You can hear me talk about that on Tuesdays and Fridays at Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. We are on YouTube, not hard to find under that name. We're also anywhere that you look for podcasts, Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. Also, we are really growing our written content. This just past week, we've updated all Dynasty rankings. I've got Dynasty tiers updated from this year. Dave and Dan Schneider are really pumping out the prospect profiles. We've got mock drafts, mailbags, just about anything you can think of. You can find that on the CBS Fantasy homepage, top right-hand corner.
Look at that. Look at that little mom and pop place, Dave, CBS.
Little engine that could.
I think they're going to make it. Dave Kluge will be back next week with Bob Harris talking about free agency predictions and playing a little matchmaker. I will be out on assignment, as Dave likes to say, aka out of the country on vacation. So, when you come back here next week, honestly, you're getting an upgrade. Bob Harris is 10 times better than me. So the show will instantly be way better. But I want to thank you guys all for watching
just
or
prepare
listening
for
all the way through.
No structure. It is going to be mayhem with me and Bob. Without you here to steer the ship, we're crashing into an iceberg.
I can't wait. I'm going to be sitting on a beach in Costa Rica listening to the show, just, 4 marks deep as usual. Well, thank you guys for listening or watching all the way through. Dave, don't crash the ship next week. We'll see y'all next time. Adios.